Frank J. Avella with the Contending. The Criterion Collection is releasing a brand new 4K UHD disc of the international version of Stanley Kubrick's final film, Eyes Wide Shut, on November 25th. The digital restoration was supervised and approved by the director of photography, Larry Smith. I'm pleased to be speaking with him today. Hi, Larry.
Hey, Joe.
Larry, the film looks amazing, and it felt just as enigmatic as it did when it came out in 1999.
Yeah, I think we were very fortunate to be recoloring it, regrading it in the modern era because we were able to do some things that clearly we weren't able to do when the film was released. On the plus side, was a major plus for me anyway, because as you may or may not know, the original movie was never color graded by Stanley because he had died. So it wasn't a finished movie visually. It was a finished movie in terms of editing, but the visuals on it there were still a few details that needed to be dealt with. So, when Criteria approached me about, what did I think? How did I think? The release version looked, and I gave them my honest opinion, and they had a very similar view.
I wanted to ask you about that because there was some controversy over whether this cut was one that Kubrick would have wanted. Do you feel like it was the his final definitive cut?
Yeah, I mean, from what I understand, talking to the family and Stanley's assistant Tony Fruin, I'd been away for the weekend and I came back and my voicemail was at like 50 messages on, and I never get 50 messages. So I said, "What is it?" And then, okay, so I kind of realised something's up here, and then I eventually get through to the house, and speak to Tony Fruin, and he kind of told me what had happened, and that's documented in the sense that he finished the movie on the Friday evening, or on the Friday it got sent to New York, where Terry Semmels, I think Tom and Nicole saw it, and then he was very very happy. I think he was very relieved that he'd got the cut that he wanted, and I believe the early hours of either the Saturday morning or the Sunday morning is when he passed.
Wow. Well, I mean, you go way back with Stanley. You were a gaffer on Barry Lyndon and The Shining. Can you speak a little bit about working with Kubrick on those projects and how you ended up being DP on Eyes Wide Shut?
Yeah, Stanley had a very small inner sanctum of people that he liked to work with. Certainly in my period of knowing him, even though the crews might be big, I'm talking about for want of a better word, the key people around him. He never liked lots of people around him, even though it's inevitable you have to have X amount of people, but they were kind of kept at arm's length. So we'd only listen to kind of very few people, maybe three or four people, when he was shooting. And so when I first worked on Barry Lyndon, of course, I didn't know him at all. And I didn't really get to speak to him very much in the early days of working on Barry Lyndon. And it wasn't until somebody got sick, which was the gaffer, that I kind of got, because there was only two of us, even though we had a massive electrical crew of like 40, 50 electricians, because the sets were so enormous and the way we lit them in those days. They weren't on the set because all the light would normally be coming through the window. If it was a daylight scene, and if it was a nighttime scene, it'd be candles or practicals of some description. So there never needed to be a lot of people on the set. So then when I sort of get dragged into that position because the gaffer was unavailable for 2 or 3 days, obviously I had to work and converse with him much more closely than I had done for the month or so previous. And so, we had to, it was either he was going to like me, or more likely trust me, I should say, and then like me afterwards, which is kind of the way it works with Stanley, or he wasn't. And because I'd already been on the movie for some time, and he knew me. We'd always speak in the morning, say good morning, and it wasn't a complete ignore you or anything like that. But so Stanley saw everything. If he was waiting for something, it's in his mind, why am I waiting for that to take that amount of time? Can that guy not do this job as well as he should? Without jumping up and down or anything like that. That was the way he would be thinking. So he knew me in that sense. And then when I kind of got pulled into the spotlight more, it was I have to tell you, it was nerve wracking because yeah, I'd done it on the edge and I knew I could do it with somebody taking the arrows, so to speak, in front of me. But now it's me, and a lot of people around Stanley couldn't. The aura of Stanley was so great that they would get nervous, like a jelly almost.
Mm.
Even they could be the best people possible, but just around Stanley, they would get very floppy and then not be able to do their job. And of course, then Stanley would think, well, who is this person? They can't do what he didn't realize that he made people as nervous, some people as nervous as he did.
Did he make you nervous, Larry?
Well, only in the very beginning when I first obviously met him in this kind of changeover period. But my reasoning was, well, look, I can do my best. I know how to do these things. I think I'm pretty sure I know what he wants. And if it's not enough, it's not enough. What can I do? I can't do more than that. So yes, there was an element of nervousness in that maybe that first morning or so. But then after that, you feel it that when people trust you, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
you don't. There's words are not needed. It's just the way they might say a sentence to you, the way they might say, "How are you? Good morning," or whatever. You kind of know you've gone through that door.
Well, the watching it again, the way you lit the film, there seems to be a lot of natural light. At least it seemed
Mhm.
that way, and an abundance of rich colors in the film. Can you speak to how you and Kubrick came to decide on the look?
Yeah. The, the Stanley's work. You probably know he never really did. He never did shot lists, and he never did storyboards. So most of the people on the set, the set was designed by the production designer, to Stanley's hand on it always. But then, what are we going to do? What's the first setup? How are we going to? What are the colors we're going to do? Are we going to make the colors warmer? Are we going to make them cooler? Whatever. We didn't know that. So Stanley's thing was he always liked to test things. Always, always, always. Ever since then, we tested every single thing. And so much of what we ended up doing on Eyes Wide Shut was because we found something that we liked,
Hmm.
and as you know, he had the luxury of time, so we could change things. And sometimes we came across things by accident, quite often. But once we got that look of the first kind of few scenes, the night interior, night exterior, day interior, day exterior, then we were pretty set. We didn't move far from that afterwards.
Was it the same with the camera movement? Because I was really struck by the Steadicam shot in Cruise's walking from room to room in the mansion sequence was extraordinary. So I'm curious, was that style decided early on, or was it kind of as you progressed?
No, well, that by the time we got to that scene, the style was already there. We everything was lit with practicals. There was very, very few, if any, film lights because we want that 360 ability to go around, go up, and so Stanley was always very strong about having same with people, I guess, minimal obstructions on the set.
How long did the shoot last, Larry?
Well, I think I was actually on the payroll for about a year and a half, maybe a little bit longer. And we were shooting over that period, but we didn't shoot every day. So you could say, I believe I read something that we shot for about a year, 360 odd days in total.
Wow. Oh, and I'm curious about Cruise and Kidman. They're both terrific in the film. Did they have a big say in the way the film was made, or was it just Stanley's film and that's it?
Well, I think, as I was saying to somebody earlier, that Tom didn't do another movie through the whole of that. So Tom was more or less in England, apart from when he went to do a couple of premieres that films he'd made, for more or less getting on for 2 years. Well over 18 months anyway. Nicole, and I think Tom put himself in Stanley's hands. He wanted to make this film with Stanley. Nicole's a different animal. Nicole she wants to work, and so she would go off and come back and go off and come back. The things that I know that Nicole talked about, and it is part of the opening scene when she's getting dressed, or when she comes back, and she's getting undressed. There were certain scenes there that she was wanted to have. How are we going to do this, Stanley? Whatever, are we going to do that? Are you sure? Or whatever. A little bit in the wardrobe, because as I was saying to somebody earlier, Stanley never really copied anyone's style. He had a vision in his mind, for example, what Nicole would look like in a particular dress, for example. Even if Nicole might say, Stanley, I'm not sure I would wear this. It's not really a modern dress, or Stanley didn't care about that. It's how he saw that woman at that moment in that dress. And I kind of remember a bit of I think I remember a discussion about the dress she wore. But beyond that, I don't think there was too much. I think, again, they both said, okay, you're the man. You tell us what you want us to do.
And yeah, the film ran into some censorship issues here in the United States. I know the international version went out the way, it was, but I
Mm,
remember I was young, but I remember that they blotted out certain sequences.
yeah.
Well, I mean, it's better than cutting it, but what do you make of
Mm.
all that?
Well, nobody liked that, of course, because again, in those days when that was done, it was done in a. It was just didn't look. It looked awful. It didn't look right. It had these kind of cardboard cutout figures suddenly standing in front of them, which they weren't. They were done optically. They were done as a post production process. But nobody liked it, and of course, if Stanley had been alive, it wouldn't have happened. I don't know how we would have got around it. So that was the dilemma that we all have now, even now, talking about recolorizing this film, regrading this film, and it's always like, what would Stanley have done? Well, we don't know 100%. We can only make our best guess to do it the way he would like it, or the way he saw it. But he wouldn't have liked that for sure.
Is there a particular, watching the film today, is there a particular scene or sequence that s- leaps out to you or that you're most proud of?
Well, I oddly enough, one of my favourite scenes was one of the very earliest scenes we shot, was when he comes into the party down the staircase with all the fairy lights there. And the reason I liked that was because um, we weren't sure how we were going to do that, and I had been using. It just happened I've been using a lot of fairy lights, doing something, not in the way we used them there, and so we kind of tested a few ways. Didn't really look right and whatever. So I said, look, we got these fairy lights. We could have a wall of them, you know, that would maybe look really interesting and give us an exposure that we wanted. Stanley's view was, we're never going to get enough exposure there. We won't get enough. It'll be a problem for the focus puller, the first AC, and all these things went on. Anyway, eventually, when we eventually tested it and put it on film, and never tested that whole staircase at this point, but tested to see what we were getting. Basically, all he did was said, well, why don't we just put more of them? Just instead of having any gaps in between them, let's just stuff it with fairy lights. So it literally became a wall of, like you would look at an LED panel today. just
Mm.
and it worked perfectly, and it set the scene, I felt, for that whole of that party scene, even though in the grade that he didn't do because it was far too bright, and that was one of the things I've corrected in this grade now.
In that party scene, Sidney Pollack, the great Sidney Pollack, who never gets enough credit for how great his
Never,
films are,
never, 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 never.
right? He plays, the and one of these powerful elite men, and I was just thinking how timely again this film is because, the men who think they can get away with anything and did, and in many respects still do.
Still do, yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Well, there's so much stuff out there now, isn't there? I mean, some of it true, some of it less true, I guess, but that's the reality, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just it's crazy. I wanted to ask you that, cinephiles always go on about all these projects that Stanley wanted to make and came close to making, like his Holocaust film, which fascinates me.
Mm.
Were you involved in any of those to any degree that never made it?
Well, the Holocaust film, which I can always never remember what the name of that film was going to be. I can't remember what it was called. Anyway, so I hadn't seen Stanley for, I don't know, 7, 8 years, even though I actually had moved very close to where he lived. I just hadn't seen him. I was just busy. I was doing other stuff, and um, and I suddenly get a call out of the blue from Stanley. Now, a lot of people might think he hasn't spoken to you for 7 years. This is why is he calling me now? When you know Stanley well, like I think I did. Um, it's never a surprise when you get a call from Stanley Kubrick if he knows you, and even if he didn't know you, if he wanted to know something, he's more likely to call you. And so I get this call, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing? We had all the niceties. Talked about a couple of movies that we'd seen, and The Heat had just come out about that time, and I think a film, and he liked Leaving Las Vegas because it was shot on 16 mil. He was interested in that, and we chatted. We had a buddy film talk, and then he said, and by the way, when you have a phone conversation with Stanley, time means nothing. You don't know how long. 3 or 4 hours later, we're still talking. Now it's like early afternoon, I would say. And he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm in my office, and I was actually getting ready. This story is well documented. I was going to go to the gym. I had my shorts on, I had my t-shirt. So now I'm not going to the gym, right? Because I've missed that slot. He said, can you come up to the house? And I said, yeah, sure. And eventually I drive up to his house, and we're chatting away and just talking about things, not about anything specific. Then we went in the kitchen. He made me a sandwich, a cup of coffee. We talked more. It's now 9 o'clock in the evening. So he said, anyway, I go home. About 3 or 4 weeks later, and he asked me some things, obviously, but which I didn't understand why he was asking me these things in particular. And a few weeks later, I'm in Pinewood Studios, and I'm walking past one of the studios, and I see Stanley's long-term continuity lady, who's now passed away, June Randell, and she called me over. She was all arms. She was very animated. Call me, Larry. What's the matter, June? She said, you're doing Stanley's movie, the Holocaust movie, right? I went, no, I don't think so, June. I said, I think you've got that wrong. And she said, no, you're doing it. I went, well, it's news to me. Cut to, don't see Stanley for another year. I don't hear anything from him for another 9, 10 months. I get a similar call to I got before. I go up to the house. We go in the car. We go to Lady Diana Spencer's house, which I cannot remember the name of it, which is in Hertfordshire, not far from it. We go to the big gates where you see Tom going in the gates to the mask ball. That wasn't the house we used in the end, but they were very similar gates. And then it was like, if you were lighting this overnight, how would you light it?
Mm.
And and I said, oh, I'd do it this. And they said, okay. And then we go back to the house. I stayed there till 10, 11 o'clock, and we're talking a load of other stuff. And by this time, obviously, the Holocaust film's been dumped. I think he spent $6 million on it. And in the end, and I think Christiana alludes to this in one of her interviews, he just couldn't make it in the end. He couldn't make it for lots of different reasons. And so he shelved it. So I wasn't really involved in that, but in a way, there was an element of involvement. And then, of course, the next film became Eyes Wide Shut, which I wasn't.
That that's amazing, Larry. Larry, what do you have coming up next?
Well, I'm just in the process of developing a film, or helping to develop a film that may shoot in will shoot in Australia um, sometime next year.
That's fantastic. Well, Larry, thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with me. Again, it's an exquisite film, as are so many of the films that you have shot, which we didn't get a chance to talk about. But you have yourself a great day.
Thank you so much, and lovely speaking to you.
Likewise.
Take care.